Remaining on the ventral side of the brain, we will now introduce the 12 cranial nerves, starting from the most anterior part of the brain to the most posterior part. Note that each type of cranial nerve exits on both sides of the brain. The first of the 12 cranial nerves is the olfactory nerve, which has a sensory function. It is located at the olfactory bulb, which is not distinctively shown here, but usually lies anterior to the olfactory tracts. The second cranial nerve is the optic nerve, which is not distinctively shown here. But usually two optic nerves branch out from the anterior part of the optic chiasm. Also, with the optic chiasm and the optic tracts, they form an X-shaped structure. Optic nerve is a sensory nerve and a part of the peripheral nervous system, while the optic tracts are part of the central nervous system. The third cranial nerve is the oculomotor nerve, which not surprisingly has a motor function, as indicated in its name. It is located posterior of the mammillary body and anterior to the pons. The fourth cranial nerve is the trochlear nerve, which has a motor function. It is located slightly posterior and lateral to the oculomotor nerve, but usually it is hidden from view by a huge nerve, which will be introduced in a moment. The trochlear nerve is the only nerve that exits from the dorsal side of the brainstem, while other nerves exit from the ventral side. The fifth nerve is the big nerve mentioned earlier, called the trigeminal nerve. It has both motor and sensory functions. It is located on the pons, but posterior and lateral to the trochlear nerve. The sixth nerve is the abducens nerve. It is located at the junction between the pons and the trapezoid body. It has a motor function, and a neat way to remember this is to think of a person's abs, which involves motor nerves to innervate the muscle. The seventh and the eighth nerves are called facial nerve and vestibulocochlear nerve, respectively. We can locate them by tracing from the groove between the pons and the trapezoid body laterally. The facial nerve, which has both motor and sensory functions, is directly anterior to the vestibulocochlear nerve, or also known as the auditory vestibular nerve, which has a sensory function. The ninth and the 10th nerves are called glossopharyngeal nerve and the vagus nerve, respectively. They exit the brain at the same location and adjacent to each other, but the glossopharyngeal nerve is anterior to the vagus nerve. The two nerves have both motor and sensory functions, and they are posterior to the vestibulocochlear nerve. The 11th cranial nerve is the spinal accessory nerve, which has a motor function. It is posterior to the vagus nerve and lateral to the ventral median fissure. It also runs along the spinal cord. The 12th cranial nerve is the hypoglossal nerve, which has a motor function. Interestingly, it is located anterior of the spinal accessory nerve and more proximal to the ventral median fissure than the 11th nerve. This concludes Photoseries 2, the ventral surface of the brain.